Gardeners spend hundreds of dollars and dozens of hours every single spring doing something that's completely unnecessary, replanting their entire vegetable garden from scratch. Trays of seedlings, bags of soil, fertilizer, constant watering, transplant shock, pest pressure, all just to get a few months of harvest before everything dies again. Meanwhile, fruit growers plant once and harvest for decades. The truth is, vegetable gardens don't have to be rebuilt every year. There are vegetables that behave almost exactly like fruit trees. You plant them once, give them a proper start, and they produce food for years. Some will feed you for a decade, others for 20 years or more. Once these plants are established, your garden starts working very differently. Instead of spending most of your time planting and replanting, you spend more time harvesting. And when you combine enough of these perennial vegetables in one garden, something powerful happens. Your food production becomes permanent. Let's start with the vegetable that proves this idea better than anything else. Asparagus is basically a long-term investment in food. A properly planted asparagus bed will produce for 20 to 30 years. But the mistake gardeners make is treating asparagus like a normal crop. They rush the establishment phase, harvest too early, and weaken the crowns. Real asparagus production starts underground. The crowns need depth, drainage, and organic matter. In raised beds, I dig trenches about 12 inches deep and about 14 inches wide. The soil that goes back in is usually about half compost and half native soil, so the roots have both nutrients and structure. Crowns are spaced about 18 inches apart. As the shoots start growing, I slowly fill in the trench until the bed is level again. The first 2 years are mostly about patience. I harvest almost nothing. That waiting period allows the plant to build a massive root system. By year 3, those crowns start pushing thick spears every spring with almost no effort from you. One mature asparagus bed can easily produce 15 to 20 pounds of harvest each season. Right alongside asparagus in the plant once, harvest for decades category is rhubarb. Rhubarb behaves much more like a fruit tree than a vegetable. Once established, a single plant can live for 20 years or even longer and produce huge stalks every spring. The biggest mistake gardeners make with rhubarb is starving it. This plant is a heavy feeder. Each spring, I add 2 to 3 inches of compost around the base and water deeply once a week during the first month of growth. That early feeding pushes massive leaves, and those leaves are what recharge the root system for next year's harvest. One mature rhubarb plant can easily produce 5 to 10 pounds of stalks every season. Artichokes are another vegetable that surprises people once they realize how long they can produce. In mild climates, they behave like true perennials and can produce for 5 to 10 years. In colder regions, they sometimes act like short-lived perennials, but even then many plants produce for 3 or 4 seasons. Artichokes need space and nutrients. A single plant can spread about 4 feet wide, which is honestly pretty impressive. In my raised beds, I mix in roughly 30% compost into the soil and give them deep irrigation every 5 days during hot weather. The payoff, let me tell you, is huge flower buds that can weigh close to a pound each. Some vegetables don't just come back every year, they actually plant themselves. Egyptian walking onions, for example, are one of the strangest and most useful plants you can grow. Instead of producing seeds, the plant forms clusters of bulbils right at the top of the stalk. As the stalk bends over, those bulbils touch the ground and root themselves. Over time, the onion literally walks across the garden. It's really something to see. Once established, you rarely need to plant onions again. The underground bulbs can be harvested like scallions, and the top bulbils can be replanted or even eaten fresh. Chives and garlic chives work in a similar way, though they do spread a bit more slowly. A single clump planted along the edge of a raised bed gradually expands every year. By the 3rd season, you can harvest handfuls whenever you need them, and the plant just keeps growing back. These are the types of vegetables that quietly produce food for decades with almost no maintenance, which is honestly pretty amazing. Some perennial vegetables act more like leafy greens that never need replanting. Sorrel is one of the earliest harvests in the garden every year. As soon as the soil warms slightly, bright green leaves start pushing up. Unlike lettuce or spinach that bolt quickly, sorrel keeps producing for months. One plant can live 5 years or longer and tolerate constant harvesting. Another old perennial green is Good King Henry. This plant was once common in European kitchen gardens. In early spring, the young shoots can be harvested almost like asparagus, and the leaves work as a spinach substitute throughout the growing season. It also thrives in partial shade, making it perfect for spots where other vegetables struggle. Some perennial vegetables grow more like shrubs than garden plants. Lovage is a perfect example. If you've never grown it before, imagine celery that grows 6 feet tall and comes back every year. The leaves have a powerful celery flavor and work beautifully in soups, broths, and stews. One plant can produce more usable leaves than most families will ever need. Because lovage develops deep roots, it becomes very drought tolerant after the first year. Then there are the perennial brassicas that completely change how you grow leafy greens. Tree collards are famous among perennial gardeners because they grow like small trees. Instead of forming a compact annual plant, they develop tall stems that can reach 8 feet or more. Leaves can be harvested continuously, just like kale, but the plant keeps producing year after year. Daubenton's kale works in a similar way. It doesn't produce viable seeds, so gardeners propagate it through cuttings. But once established, it becomes an incredibly productive perennial green. In one of my raised beds, a single Daubenton's kale plant produces more leaves over a year than an entire row of annual kale. 9-star broccoli is another unusual perennial brassica. Instead of producing just one harvest and then dying, this plant keeps sending out small broccoli heads across multiple seasons, as long as it's well fed. These plants, honestly, can turn a garden bed into a permanent supply of greens. Some of the most productive perennial vegetables actually grow underground. Horseradish is nearly indestructible once it's planted. Just a single root cutting can quickly turn into a permanent patch that produces thick roots year after year. The key with horseradish is giving it a spot where it can spread without causing problems. Harvesting the roots every fall actually keeps the plant manageable. Another underground producer is the sunchoke, which is also called Jerusalem artichoke. Above ground, it grows kind of like a tall sunflower, but underground it forms clusters of edible tubers. Even if you harvest most of them, the ones left behind will regrow the following year. A small patch can easily produce, 10 to 20 pounds of tubers each season. Watercress is another perennial that thrives when given the right conditions. It grows naturally in moving water and, honestly, performs incredibly well in hydroponic systems. In shallow flowing channels, it grows rapidly and can be harvested every few weeks. This is one of the easiest leafy greens to grow hydroponically because it naturally prefers that environment. Some perennial vegetables spread slowly, but really reward patience. Caucasian spinach is a climbing plant that produces spinach-like leaves all season long. Given a trellis or fence, it can live for years and produce steady harvests. Turkish rocket is another long-lived plant that produces edible flower buds with a flavor similar to broccoli rabe. Wild leeks, also known as ramps, are one of the most prized perennial vegetables for shaded areas. They grow naturally in forest soil rich with organic matter. Once planted, they gradually form expanding colonies that can be harvested carefully each spring. The key is harvesting lightly so the colony continues expanding. Once you begin combining plants like these in one garden, the entire system starts to change. The workload drops dramatically. Instead of spending every spring starting seedlings and replanting beds, many of your crops simply wake up and start growing again on their own. The soil improves because root systems remain in place year after year. Beneficial microbes stabilize, and honestly, the garden becomes far more resilient. Annual vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, squash, and beans will always have a place. But when perennial vegetables become the backbone of your garden, food production becomes dramatically easier. The most productive gardens aren't always the ones planted the most often. They're the ones designed to keep producing long after the planting is finished. If you want more practical, experience-tested strategies like this, subscribe to Gardening Simplified and share this video with another gardener who's tired of rebuilding their garden every single year. Because the smartest gardens don't restart every spring. They just keep growing.